First of all, I'd like to say a very big thank you to Petra, Mayor, for organising this meeting. We've been emailing each other back and forth for quite a time, haven't we, Petra? And I want to also thank everybody who's turned up today on this bank holiday weekend and given up a beautiful day out there to come inside and listen to a talk. And I also want to extend very best wishes from the members of the Victoria Theosophical Society in Canada. Actually, Victoria is at the most southernmost point of Vancouver Island. Very often people get muddled up with Victoria thinking it's Vancouver. Because it's on Vancouver Island, they think it's Vancouver, but it's not actually. It's on this island, which is 1.5 hours by ferry from Vancouver. And Victoria, though it's smaller than Vancouver, we don't even have 1 million people, I think we have about 350,000, is actually the capital of British Columbia. So anyway, wonderful greetings to you all from the members of our group in Victoria. We meet once a week, and actually we meet in a church, United Church of Canada, that is very open to other communities, and they allow us to have our library there. And we meet in a seminar room, and we have a lovely chapel that's off the seminar room that is for our use as well, and it has lovely stained glass windows. Now, I like to begin my talks with, in the way that we begin our meetings in Victoria, which is with a mantra. And it's a very ancient mantra, a Hindu mantra, that goes back 5,000 years to the sage Vishvamitra, and is known as the Gayatri Mantram. And I see we have a Hindu gentleman with us, and actually I'll do it in Sanskrit, especially for you, all right? And then I'll give the English translation. The English translation I'm using, there are many different translations, but the translation I'm going to use is actually the one by W.Q. Judge. He was the third founder of the Theosophical Society. There were 3 of them. Some people forget about poor old W.Q. Judge. Blavatsky, Henry Steele Olcott, and W.Q. Judge, who was a young Irish lawyer at the time when the Theosophical Society was founded in New York in 1875. But he was a very keen Sanskrit scholar, and I will mention him again in the talk, because he was the one that kept things going in America when Blavatsky and Olcott went to India. So this is first of all, the Sanskrit. I'll chant it, and then give you the English version. It's really invoking the divine within us. And as you all know, we are like holographic images of the ultimate. We are a reflection. Within us is the ultimate, which is an amazing thought. We have the divine within us. So when we say this mantra, it's invoking the divine and asking for illumination from the divine. And it is directed to the divine macrocosmically and also microcosmically. Okay? So this is how it goes in Sanskrit. I hope I get the pronunciation correct. Om Bhurбhuva Swaha Tat Savitur Varenyam Bhako Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yona Prachodayat. Om Bhurбhuva Swaha Tat Savitur Varenyam Bhako Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yona Prachodayat. Om Bhurбhuva Swaha Tat Savitur Varenyam Bhako Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yona Prachodayat. O thou who sustainest the universe, from whom all things proceed, and to whom all things return, unveil for us the face of the true spiritual sun, hidden by a disk of golden light, that we may know the whole truth and do our whole duty as we journey to thy sacred feet. Om. 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 Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Since my 20s, actually I'm going to give you a little bit of a bit of information personally. I hope you don't think it's egotistical, but sometimes it's nice to share a little bit of personal information before one begins a talk. I want to mention that since my late 20s, I have been passionate about the wisdom teachings. That is a term used for theosophy by the great lecturer Wayne Dyer. Some of you might have heard of him. He was very popular in the United States and in Canada, and also known, of course, as the ageless wisdom or the ancient ageless wisdom, and also as the perennial philosophy. Aldous Huxley termed that term, the perennial philosophy. And as you all know, I'm just preaching to the converted. The ageless wisdom, ancient wisdom, predates all religions. It goes back thousands and thousands of years to infant humanity, really. And it is really the esoteric core. Though it predates all the religions of the world, it really represents the profound esoteric core of all religions. For instance, it's to be found in esoteric Christianity. Annie Besant, as you know, wrote a book on esoteric Christianity. Gnosticism is the profound, is basically the esoteric side of Christianity. Islam, we have Sufism, and we have in Buddhism, we have the northern school of Buddhism, which apparently follows what Buddha taught to his closest disciples, and that is called Mahayana Buddhism. And in Judaism, you have the Kabbalah. So every religion, and I've only mentioned a few, have this profound esoteric side to them, which is actually linked to the ancient wisdom, which predates all of them. And as most of you know, theosophy, which means the wisdom of God or the divine wisdom, is a restatement. In later times, well, it was in the 1870s that the Theosophical Society was founded. It was a revivification, a restatement of the teachings of the ageless wisdom. Many of these teachings have been kept under wraps for centuries. But then the masters felt that it was the right time. Some of the masters, not all of them, and I'll be talking a little bit more about the masters in a while, felt that the time was ripe for humanity in general to know more about the esoteric and the more detailed teachings that are at the core of religion and religions, to bring about a greater understanding between the peoples of the world and the cultures and the different philosophies and religions of the world. In my late 20s, I was going through a time of quite a lot of confusion. And I was going to church, but I was a seeker and not finding my answers through mainline Christianity. But as fortune would have it, I met a deep student of these teachings. I was working on a pocket liner cruise ship, actually, going to and fro northern BC and Alaska. and he was the first officer and I was the social hostess. I only got the job because I could play piano, actually. But anyway, I guess it was destiny to meet him. And I could tell that he was a very profound thinker. And he started lending me books. He had this amazing library. By the way, I'm so glad that the meeting is here in this amazing library. I saw this the other day, Thursday. I was speaking at Watkins Bookshop, and afterwards we came here, and my brother and I stayed overnight here. And I came in here and I thought, boy, I wish I was giving the talk on Sunday in this room, but I was told I was going to be giving it downstairs. But anyway, because I love libraries. But there's a lot more books here than my husband had. But anyway, I thought it was a lot when I married him. So anyway, we had over 4,000 books. And I was living on the ship for 4 months, and he kept lending me books, and I had a whole pile of books at the side of my bunk bed. For 4 months, I had this pile of books to get through. Anyway, amongst the books that he lent me was the Mahatma, were the Mahatma letters, or a published version of the Mahatma letters. And that book, along with many other theosophical books, like Besant's Study in Consciousness, and also books on the key to theosophy and so on, and also Cyril Scott's books made a big impression on me. They made a tremendous, profound impact on me. Do you know, it was like a treasure chest opening up, discovering these teachings. I wondered where I had been all my life. And I was praying for understanding when I was younger, and I felt that these prayers had been answered by discovering these teachings. Not that they give you the answers to absolutely everything. As my brother mentioned, you know, when he hears about these teachings, they always bring up more questions, and we must never stop seeking. That's a perceptive remark, that to not think that everything is supplied by these teachings. We must never stop seeking. We must always continue to grow and seek further. Blavatsky herself has said, when she wrote The Secret Doctrine with the help of the Mahatmas, that only a small veil had been lifted on the mysteries of life. And teachings that she could have revealed, but maybe she wasn't allowed to at that time, she said would have filled 100 more volumes. So, the Mahatma letters impacted me a great deal. And just to let you know how obsessed I was with these teachings, I fell down the stairs and broke my leg one Sunday, I think it was a Sunday afternoon, and the book I grabbed when the paramedics came to take me to the hospital were the Mahatma letters. So, my book, Insights from the Masters, is a compilation. I've written the foreword and I've put a glossary together, but I really put this together for myself and for the people in our theosophical group in Victoria, because I wanted to share these teachings more, and I wanted to get our group interested in these letters. And they're not easy to read, as you know, and they're long paragraphs, and there's 150 letters, and a lot of Sanskrit words and so on. So I thought one thing one can do is to collect what do they say about different subjects. Now I'm going to give you a little bit of background on the saga, and for those who were at Watkins Bookshop the other day, I'm sorry I'm going to sound a bit like a broken record, but because there was a party in full swing just outside the shop behind where I was talking, I had a shout, and I don't think it was easy for people to listen to me. So anyway, I hope you don't mind me repeating some things that I tried to say on Thursday evening. But the Mahatma letters cover very, very many topics. All right, I have here 50 topics. I didn't start off with, all right, I'm going to have 50 topics. It just worked out that way. But, you know, even though these letters were written 25 years ago, I'm not very good at math, but round about that, some people think that, all right, the language is going to be, you know, difficult or a bit Victorian, etc., and probably that can act as a barrier. You know, everybody likes sort of instant language these days, and, you know, with texting and so on, people are not used to reading very profound things sometimes these days. But to me, that I love the language, because one of the masters involved here was really a literary, I think, kind of a literary genius. His English is very beautiful, and I think the beautiful language, it doesn't matter when it's written, will never grow out of date, just as beautiful music. Mozart's music will never go out of style, nor will Beethoven's. So I think the literature in these letters will never go out of style. Now, I have mentioned that that even though they're difficult, I do believe that the topics, though, are relevant for today's seekers. So I'll just mention some of the topics, and later on, after I've gone into the saga, as to how these letters came to be written, I would like to zero in on one particular topic. But the topics I'm just going to mention now is, well, the one topic that they emphasize a great deal, and it's something that we all need to hear today, is the topic of the idea that there is one great source that is at the heart of all of life. And that great source is, the masters use the term the ultimate absolute. They prefer not to use the word God, though they say you can use the word God, but I think they prefer to, because they are actually, even though they are universalists, they are also esoteric Buddhists, and they think if you use the word God, you tend to think of a Santa Claus in the sky type of thing, separate from creation. And as we know with Theosophy and the Ageless Wisdom teachings, that we have this sense, this belief that the ultimate is everywhere and in everything, and that there's nothing excluded from the ultimate. So there's one great source that is in all of life, and within every atom of our being is infiltrated by this one great source. So everything, all of life is interrelated. So in these letters, the idea of the interrelatedness of life is emphasized. And particularly the idea, which of course the masters, when they inspired the founding of the Theosophical Society, their idea was not to talk about, well, they don't like the term miracles, but to talk about magical things, though there does seem to be a lot of magic in these teachings. I think it's magical in many ways. But the main idea was to bring about greater understanding, greater brotherhood, and of course we use this word sisterhood, not just for humanity, but in the way that we treat all of life. You know, the animal kingdom, the plant kingdom, the mineral kingdom, and because everything is interrelated. So that is emphasized in the letters, and it was a fairly new concept in those days, especially for Westerners. So that is one theme that runs throughout all the letters. Another theme that is emphasized is that of evolution, and not, of course, just physical evolution, though they do go into that, and they do talk about Darwin and where they differ with Darwin and where they think Darwin was on track and where he isn't on track or wasn't on track. Of course, the idea that evolution also embraces the idea of evolution emotionally, the emotional aspect of our being evolves, and also the mental aspect of our being, and also the spiritual aspect of our being evolves. So this idea of evolution on many levels. I expect most of you have heard of Teilhard de Chardin. He helped to bring some of those ideas into Christianity. He was a Jesuit. I expect many of you have heard of him. And then I think he was he wasn't allowed to publish his writings when he was alive, the phenomenon of man and so on. Anyway, that's another theme, evolution. Another theme that's very important is the theme of understanding the human being, the constitution of the human being. You know, we're very complex. You know, when people used to say to me, oh, it's easy to understand people, to understand yourself. And I thought, no, it isn't. It isn't easy to understand oneself. We are very complex. And the masters go to a great deal of trouble to describe, and in fact, this was the first time, I think, in theosophy that details were given to the really self-fold, what is called the self-fold nature of man. That we have 7 principles related to our being. We're not just physical beings. We have a vitality body that maybe medical science is beginning, medical science is beginning to recognize, and people that are into acupuncture and acupressure and so on, beginning to recognize the idea of what we call the etheric body today, the vital body. But we also have, of course, an emotional body, or an emotional sheath. In Hinduism, they talk about the sheaths. And we also have a mental body, or a mental sheath. And we also have, of course, the divine aspects of our being. There are 7 aspects to our being, apparently. The highest being the spirit, which is also called in Hinduism Atma. And then we have the spiritual soul, which acts as an intermediary, but it's pretty high up in our divine nature of our being, and that's what we call the buddhi. And it's also related to the intuition and the development of compassion and understanding and oneness, the sensing the oneness of life. So there's a lot said on that subject in the Mahatma letters. And, before these letters had been written, the only theosophical literature that had been written, apart from some articles, was Blavatsky's Isis Unveiled, which she wrote in New York before she left for India. But in Isis Unveiled, it does not go into reincarnation in detail, and it does not go into the 7-fold nature of man. The masters felt at that time that it might be a bit too much to talk about the 7-fold nature. They waited before they let that information come out into the public. So they pretty well stuck to the idea of spirit, soul and body, which is what St. Paul talked about. All right, but within the 3 are other components, as we've been learning in theosophy. So they call them principles, and they number them. So when you read in the Mahatma letters about the first principle, the second principle, the third, and so on, they are referring to beginning with the densest, which is our physical, the second being the etheric, which they gave a different name to in those days, and the third being the kamic, or which was the term used in ancient in the ancient wisdom, or which means the desire body, and so on. So there's a lot of information on these 7 principles. There's also some very interesting information on the difference between illumined mind and everyday mind, the intellect, the everyday mind and the illumination. So there's a chapter there on illumined mind and intellect and intuition, and how they talk about these 3. Of course, they were dealing with, in these letters, as I'll be explaining more fully in a moment, with 2 gentlemen who were very, very bright, very highly educated, well, in a sense, Sinet wasn't that highly educated, but he was because he couldn't go to university because he had to earn a living for his family because his father died when he was young. But he certainly had a great literary gift, and he certainly had developed his mind, and he became a journalist, but more about him later. But certainly these 2 gentlemen had well-developed minds, and they knew how to analyze things. And, in the West, we learn to analyze things in great detail. So the masters had their work cut out dealing with 2 Westerners who were very intellectual. I want to say here that, and I should have said this at the beginning, if any of you want to make any comments or you want to interject, it's a long time to listen to me talking. There'll be an opportunity for questions and answers a bit later on. But if there's anything you want to say or any comments, please interject. I don't mind at all. All right? So we make it a little easier, not just listening to my voice all the time. All right? So the subject of illumined mind is very interesting to me. And it's covered in the Mahatma letters. The subject of reincarnation, for instance, and what they go into with reincarnation is really, what is it that reincarnates? You know, when people say they believe in reincarnation, one needs to say, well, what do you really mean by reincarnation? And what is it that links up all the, you know, the lifetimes? What is it that provides that continuous thread between all the lifetimes that you've had? You know, so they go into some detail about reincarnation, and they point out, yes, they can look at a chela, at a disciple, and they can tell, you know, what other lifetimes that person has had. But they say they don't like to do that, because really you should concentrate on the lifetime you have now. But in some cases they will reveal it if they feel that it's helpful. And in fact, in the case of one of these correspondents, one of the masters does let him know about 2 of his previous incarnations. So the subject of reincarnation, and of course you can't tackle reincarnation without karma. And then they also say, without karma, you can't tackle the subject of nirvana. So they say these 3, these are all part of, they say, the great mysteries of the metaphysics of the ageless wisdom, and the metaphysics of Buddhism, they say too. So there's a chapter in there on reincarnation and karma and the skandhas, which are the tendencies we come into life with, and also a chapter on nirvana. So, and another subject that is very important to people today is, of course, the subject of what happens at death. You know, when I was growing up, you barely could talk about death or ask questions about it. But when I was confirmed in the Anglican Church, I thought, when I was confirmed, maybe now I'll find out, you know, because I always wondered, you know, why don't we get knowledge about, somebody must know what happens at death. So I asked my minister, the Reverend Theobald. I had a private interview with him after I got confirmed. I was confirmed, by the way, by a very avant-garde bishop in England. His name was John Robinson. He wrote a book, Honest to God. And yeah, anyway, and he spoke up at the trial of D.H. Lawrence's book. And if you know it, Women in Love, I think it was. It was Lady Chatterley's lover, John Robinson. So he was a very progressive bishop. Anyway, he confirmed me. And I thought afterwards, I'm going to find out things that that I've been asking and not being able to find answers to in mainline Christianity. But I just got platitudes. Now, the masters provide all kinds of information about life after death, the death process, and the fact that at the very moment of death, and I think this is so important for everybody to know, everybody, regardless of what state of mind you are in, has a moment of great clarity, because the all-knowing higher self draws close, very close, and takes over the procedure. Unfortunately, when that happens, many people get scared or frightened. The great light can be seen and people get afraid, and that moment, that great opportunity, there's a great opportunity at that moment, that moment of clarity, even a moment of what is called enlightenment. There was a theosophist by the name of Benito Reyes who wrote a book called Conscious Dying. Don't know whether any of you have read it, but it's a bit along the lines of, but not entirely, of Sogyal Rinpoche's book, The Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. And you know, when he came to America, he was appalled at the way Westerners treated death and the lack of preparation for those who were dying. And he instituted a society to help with that. And so attitudes have changed since then, and that was in the 1970s. And so the masters actually gave a lot of information in their letters, information that I don't think really had been available to Westerners before, because Blavatsky hadn't got into it in Isis Unveiled. So there's another topic that I think is very useful for the modern-day seeker. So I have a whole chapter there about what the masters have to say. It's in their words on all the excerpts that I could possibly find on, not quite all, but as many as possible, on what they say about death, the process of death, and the afterlife, the bardos, the periods in between lives. And also Devashan. And you're all familiar with the term Devashan, which is supposed to be a time, it's not the same as nirvana, but it's a time of great bliss, and it'll last as long as you're, it depends on your karma, on the karma of the previous life. But some disciples choose, some later writers have suggested that some disciples choose to skip Devashan, come back into incarnation more quickly, skip Devashan, and because they want to get on with, or their soul wants them to get on with of finishing the task of spiritual progress and becoming of greater help to humanity. So anyway, there's a lot of information on Devashan. I've never seen any more information on Devashan in any other spiritual books. So, and then there's the topic of discipleship and the guru-student relationship. That's very important. I'll say more about that later. All right, any questions or any comments before I move on? Because I'm going to just go on. I'm going to now get into the saga of how these letters were written. It's quite an interesting saga. Yes, sir?
You said there were two recipients. One was sent. Who was the other one?
A.O. Hume. I'm going to talk about them. Good. I'm going to talk about, and I've got my rogues gallery here. I should have asked for a ruler or a pointer. Do we have such a thing in the house or not? Never mind, I can use my finger. Okay. All right, well, we don't have a straw at the back there, do we? Oh, okay. Sorry, I should have organised that earlier. All right, so the saga of how these letters got to be written. All right, first of all, I'm going to talk about the 4 individuals who were involved. All right, though there were on the fringes other people involved, of course, like Blavatsky. All right, I'm going to begin with the Mahatmas. 2 particular Mahatmas were involved in this correspondence, though there was another one who became a Mahatma at the time that these letters were being written, and his name was Dwal Khul. I'll be mentioning him too, because he is also mentioned in the letters and does actually write some of the letters. All right, the first one I'm going to zero in on is the Master Khatumi. His name is spelt H-U-M-I there, but it can also be spelled H-O-O-M-I. He mostly signed his name H-O-O-M-I. Now the name, that's his mystical name. And the other master was the Master Maurya. They didn't, of course, call themselves masters. They didn't call themselves Mahatmas. They called themselves brothers. And it wasn't until the Theosophical Society really got going and people started hearing about these sages that were working through Blavatsky, that the term master was used. In fact, that was first used, I think, by Blavatsky, if I'm correct. Anyway, it's the Theosophists that have come up with the term masters. Now, there's a good reason why that term is used. But anyway, let me say first of all that their names, Khatumi and Maurya, are not their real names. They are their mystical names, which they allowed their disciples to use. The Khatumi name actually comes from the Hindu Puranas, and he chose a character in the Hindu Puranas. The Hindu Puranas are amazing myths which are based on the mysteries of life, explaining the mysteries of life and the universe through incredible myths. Some of you may be familiar with some of them. Blavatsky refers a great deal in The Secret Doctrine to the Vishnu Purana, which is an amazing, amazing Purana. And it's very worthwhile looking into the Vishnu Purana and reading the Vishnu Purana. So why he chose that particular character in the Puranas, I have no idea. I don't know whether you would know. Sir? No, maybe not. But anyway, Maurya, the name Maurya, is related to a whole dynasty of warrior princes. It used to be spelled M-A-U-R-Y-A. And the reason why I suppose he took that name was because he was actually a Rajput prince. He was from Rajasthan. Master Khatumi was from Kashmir, or Kashmiri family, and he actually spent a lot of time in Europe. And he was in Germany, in Hamburg, even studying at Hamburg University. He could speak German. He went to Paris and was at Paris University as well, and he could speak French extremely well. And in fact, in the letters, he likes to use French phrases. And Master Moria, who works very closely with a Master Khatumi, used to tease him and say, he used to tease Khatumi and say, call him my Frenchified friend. He also was in London, and his English, I think, is beautiful, is brilliant. He loved poetry, all right, and he quotes poetry in the Mahatma letters. And sometimes he's not sure exactly where the poem comes from, but because he says it's there in the Akasha or whatever, but he likes it and he wants to quote it. All right, these two were part of a Himalayan brotherhood. All right, a Himalayan brotherhood that was part of a greater brotherhood of masters, of Mahatmas, not just in male bodies. They're in physical bodies. Some people think they were phantoms. No, not at all. Or in more subtler bodies. No, not at all. At the time these letters were written, they were full-blooded men. All right, but they had mastered, through their various incarnations, they had mastered the physical, emotional, mental aspects of life through their many, many incarnations. Some people like to speculate about who they were in other incarnations. They both had many, many incarnations. And as you said at the very beginning, that lovely quotation, which is from the Mahatma letters, that the masters are a rare efflorescence of a generation of inquirers. So they've been seekers and inquiring over many, many generations. And as a result of that, and meeting the challenges of life on physical, emotional, mental, spiritual levels, they have eventually attained what we call in Theosophy masterhood. They have actually attained a state where they don't need to reincarnate any longer, and they can enter into nirvana. But they have chosen to renounce nirvana and stay close to humanity and be part of a spiritual hierarchy. Some people don't like that term, hierarchy, but the fact is that even on those levels there's a hierarchy. There are adepts that were even more advanced than them that they had to answer to, and they too had adepts that were higher than them, and then above them would be, they would be angelic celestial hosts that would know more than them. So it is a hierarchy. So there is a hierarchy at a certain point when you have attained all that's to be learnt in life, and you don't go into nirvana. I think at that point you have a choice, just as Buddha did. He had a choice, but Buddha chose to stay and help humanity. Yes, sir.
I read somewhere that it was also called Khatumi Lal Singh.
Right, Lal Singh. Sometimes he sounded that. Yeah. That was the family. That could have been the family name. We do not know for sure. And there are very few letters where he actually signs Lal Singh. Mm-hmm. Yes. Thank you for bringing that up. So, this brotherhood is those who've mastered, and as I say, some, they're also female. They're also female masters. We don't hear so much about them. But this gentleman, Sabaro, some of you heard of him? Sabaro was a great Hindu scholar and a very important member of the Theosophical Society when they were in India, in Adyar, in Chennai, or Madras as it used to be called. And he wrote a book called Esoteric Writings, and in that book he has a chapter on female adepts. So there are female masters. Some people wonder, well, why do they mostly, in male bodies? I have my own views on that, but anyway, it could be, I think, anyway, perhaps I shouldn't get into it, but if anyone wants to talk about it afterwards, we could. I have my own views. I don't know whether it's true or not, but certainly there are female adepts. And I believe Geoffrey Hodgson mentioned some as well, who was a great theosophist. Now, I'll say a little bit more about these two Mahatmas who have chosen to stay close to humanity. Khatumi, they were both worked very closely together, but energetically they were very different. They both believed fervently in this mission, in this project. Masters take on, Mahatmas, adepts, take on projects. And those projects, they have to also interest seekers and people who are on the spiritual path, who are not as far along as they are, to help bring about those, manifest those projects in the physical world. So their project, they believed the time had come to bring about a revivification of the ageless wisdom. An attempt had been made, actually, in the 4th century by some amazing philosophers in Alexandria, Ammonius Saccas, and some Neoplatonists in Alexandria in the 4th century. And actually, they wanted to bring about harmony between the different philosophical and religious factions in that part of the world. And they coined the term Theosophia, and they called themselves lovers of truth. All right, so that term hadn't, actually Blavatsky didn't invent that term. It had been used before. Now, Khatumi was the softer one of the two, and those of you who study the 7 rays, all right, not much has been said about the 7 rays in the Mahatma letters. More came out about the rays later on, which is part of the new psychology. But some of the early theosophists, people like Ernest Wood, did write about the rays, and Blavatsky does mention the 7 rays in the Secret Doctrine. But going into detail of how these rays affect the human being, that was not covered in either the Mahatma letters or the Secret Doctrine. So it was up to later writers to go more into that. But if you're into the rays, Khatumi would be more a second-ray individual, a soft, very kind, never wanting to hurt people's feelings and so on. And Master Moria, he tended to be quite blunt. He'd call a spade a spade. He believed in telling the truth regardless. And he would be more a first-ray individual, if you think about the rays, which is politics comes under the first ray, and leadership, that sort of thing. There's the second ray, the people who want to help humanity and through the nursing profession or ministering to others, social services and so forth, humanitarian causes. He was very interested in developing philanthropy in the world. And Master Moria was very interested in the esoteric groups that were developing, and also very interested in the political climate of the world in different parts of the world. So they worked, though, closely together, though they were different energetically. They admired one another very much and supported one another. So now, what about these other individuals, and how did this correspondence really take place? Any questions about these two Mahatmas? Yes, sir.
When was he in Germany?
Pardon?
When did he go to Germany?
Where did he go? Hamburg.
No, when?
When? I don't know the exact date. He does refer to some German philosophers and teachers that he met in Germany. I beg your pardon?
Any year at all?
Well, it would have been before these letters were written, which was the letters were written from 1880 to 1885. Blavatsky died in 1891, and these were written 1880 to 1885. So this would have been a lot earlier than that.
I understand
So,
there's
yes,
talk of Khatumi being in Oxford as well.
you're right. Thank you for bringing that up. He was in Oxford, you're absolutely right. He was familiar with the Bodleian library, yes. Now, the two fellows that were so very fortunate to enter into this correspondence. I'll begin with Sinet. I've already told you a little bit about Sinet. Alfred Percy Sinet came from a modest family in England. His father died, as I said, when he was a teenager, and his mother hardly had enough money really to keep the family together, and he had to go out to work when he was just a teenager, and he went and worked at a printing firm, and he discovered through working for this printing firm that he liked to write. Anyway, to cut a long story short, he became a journalist, and his literary genius came to the surface, and in fact he became, first of all, the sub-editor of the Evening News here in London, and then the editor of the Evening News in London. Later on, he was offered a post in Hong Kong and was the editor of a newspaper in Hong Kong, I don't know the name of it, and then later on still, he was invited to India to be the editor of the Anglo-Indian newspaper known as the Pioneer in Allahabad. And that magazine is still, newspaper is still going strong in India. So he was highly respected in India, and he was part of the British Raj. He was an Anglican Christian. Both of them were Anglican Christians, but they were very interested in spiritualism, both of them. So before they ever went to India, he had been attending spiritualistic seances. Seances were very popular in those days, and spiritualism. And the masters have a lot to say about spiritualism in the Mahatma letters, their take on it, and their interpretation of what happens in spiritualism. There's a whole chapter in the book with the title Spiritualism. Now, Sinet was married to a delightful lady called Patience, and she was very patient. The masters always admired her, and always thought that he could learn a lot from his wife, because he needed to learn more patience, and that's mentioned in the letters. He's mentioned constantly, you need to learn more patience. Learn from your wife. He became later on a good friend of Hume. All right, so now they also had a country house up in Simla. Some people call it Shimla today. I don't know which is the correct one. Simla or Shimla. And up there, up in the foothills of the Himalayas, right, Simla? It's cooler there in the height of summer. And in the days when the British Raj were in charge, they used to retreat, didn't they? Government people used to retreat up to Simla in the hot months of the year. And A.O. Hume also had, his main house was in Simla. He had a castle. It was called Rosny Castle on the main hill there, which is called Jacko Hill. All right, now a little bit about Hume. Alan Octavian Hume. He came from a fairly well-to-do family in England. His father was a parliamentarian. He was interested, even though he was a conservative. I shouldn't say that, even though he was a conservative. He was very interested in human rights and being a bit of an activist. He was an enlightened parliamentarian. And Alan was sent to India with the East India Company. But later on, he became a civil servant and was given the post of a magistrate up in northern India. In a place called Etawah, he became the magistrate. And he was a very good magistrate. And in fact, he showed great courage at a very difficult time, when there was a mutiny there, and where he apparently helped bring an end to the violence. And he was awarded the greatest award that you can be given in Britain at that time for bravery, which was the Bath Award, the Order of the Bath. He's actually well known in India as a historical political figure, because he was the one that pioneered the Party of Congress, or the Congress Party, which helped eventually to bring about the independence of India. And he was concerned. He felt a great deal for the conditions of the Indian people and the wrong treatment by the British and so on. He tried to do something about it. even though he was not in a position to bring about independence, of course, but he was the one that pioneered the Party of Congress. And apparently Annie Besant was quite involved with the Party of Congress, those of you who know a lot about Annie Besant. And a number of theosophists came to be involved in the Congress Party. Annie Besant, by the way, was a great friend of Gandhi. Now, these two gentlemen became theosophists as a result of meeting Blavatsky. So how was it that Blavatsky got to India? So that's quite interesting too. And how did they all meet? As you know, the Theosophical Society was started in New York. And there was quite a bit of opposition to the society in the earlier days in New York, because of some of the things that Blavatsky and the Mahatmas were saying through Blavatsky regarding spiritualism. And yet, Theosophy also did attract people who were into spiritualism. And many of the people that were early Theosophists in India were also spiritualists. But the masters were hoping to help spiritualists become more profound in their thinking, to help them to understand the law of karma and reincarnation, to help them think in more profound ways instead of wanting to constantly communicate with their loved ones who have passed on and need to be left alone to some extent to do what they have to do in the in-between stages of life. Blavatsky was advised, and this gentleman, Henry Steele Olcott, who was the co-founder with Blavatsky of the Theosophical Society in New York. He was a very distinguished gentleman. He was a military man, highly respected by the government, and also he became a journalist. And you probably all know the story of how he met Blavatsky. I'll not go into it now, but it's quite an interesting story. They met at spiritualist meetings at this farmstead out in the country. I think it was called the Eddystone Farmhouse, was that correct? And these brothers who were spiritualists, all kinds of amazing things were happening there. That's where the two of them met, because he was investigating these spiritualists, these two brothers who seemed to have certain abilities to contact spirits, so-called, and he wanted to write about it in his newspaper, the New York, whatever it was called. I forget what it was called, but Blavatsky and he and Blavatsky and Olcott became very close workers and co-workers, and they lived together in a suite of apartments known as the Lamasery in New York. Now, the masters wanted them to go to India because they felt that it had to be established in India, and that once it was established in India, the Theosophical movement would proliferate. But Olcott was reluctant to go. He had various attachments in New York, and it took the master Moria coming to visit him to convince him that that would be the right thing to do, for him to accompany Blavatsky to go to India. And there is that lovely story, probably some of you know it, when the Master Moria appeared to Olcott. He was sitting in his study in the Lamasery. Blavatsky and he had their own separate studies. The door was closed, and then all of a sudden Moria, who was 6'8", appeared in the study there. 6'8", and he didn't... Olcott was totally in awe. He didn't know how he'd got through the door because the door was closed. And there he was, 6'8". Katumi used to call him my bulky brother. And he talked to him for half an hour. Now, the masters never coerced anybody to do anything, because that would be contravening karma and contravening your free will. And so he didn't say, you've got to go to India and support Blavatsky. He just suggested and put forth the good reasons behind it, that's all. But by the end of the interview, Henry Steele Olcott was convinced. And then he thought, who's going to believe me that the Master Moria has been here? And the Master Moria read his mind, and he began to untwirl his turban. We always associate Master Moria with this white turban. And he untwirled the turban and handed it to Olcott and said, there you are, this can help you with convincing people that I've been here. And of course, as probably most of you know, that turban still exists today and is in the museum at Adyar in Chennai, in the international headquarters in their museum. So, once they got to India, Blavatsky spent a lot of time up in Simla and with Olcott, and various amazing things began to happen around her up in northern India, and these two gentlemen heard about this. Of course, Sinnett being a journalist, you know, they heard about these things that were happening, and they wanted to go and experience some of these things themselves. So he managed to get in contact with Blavatsky, and A.O. Hume was already in Simla, and they all got to meet, and they in fact became theosophists. It didn't take much convincing. And as I've pointed out, they did have mystical interests. They were interested in spiritualism. They had lots of questions that they wanted answers to, and they desperately, particularly Sinnett first of all, it was his idea, not Hume's, to correspond with the Mahatmas that he knew that Blavatsky was in touch with these Mahatmas. And he thought, wouldn't it be great if I could correspond with them and get this dialogue going on all the mysteries of life? So Blavatsky, Sinnett went to Blavatsky and asked him, is it possible for me to correspond with a master? And Blavatsky said she really was a very kind-hearted lady. I know some people think, you know, she had her idiosyncrasies and she could be very difficult and she could fly off the handle, etc. But she had a very compassionate heart. So she said, all right, I will try. So she goes first of all to her teacher, who is the Master Moria. By the way, I hadn't mentioned earlier, but Master Moria was Blavatsky's spiritual teacher and had been since her childhood. She saw him in visions when she was just a child. And when she was a teenager, he saved her life. When she had a terrible accident related to... She was a very good horse rider, but she had a terrible accident. He saved her life. It wasn't until she came to London, when she was 20, and she was receiving lessons, piano lessons. She was a very good pianist, and she hoped to become a better pianist, and she was receiving lessons from Moschels. And her father was with her too, actually, here in London. And she got to see him one day when she was in the mall, and there was this whole entourage of Maharajas going to visit Queen Victoria. And he was among that entourage. And she saw him and realized, that's the man who I've been seeing. And he was the one that has saved me. And their eyes locked, and he indicated, you know, she was ready to throw herself at his feet. You know, she felt very devoted to Moria, and later on, she throws herself at his feet, and he doesn't want any worship at all, and he's quite annoyed about it. But at this point where she sees him and their eyes lock, he restrains, and as if, you know, now's not the time. But then the next day she's in Hyde Park, and lo and behold, he comes walking into Hyde Park, and he sits down on a bench, and she's sitting on a park bench, and he comes and sits next to her and starts talking to her about the work that she could do in the future as a service to humanity, and that he and others would help her with, but that it would require tremendous sacrifice, and would she think about it? So, where did we get to with the correspondence? Well, she asks Moria. He flatly refuses to get involved in a correspondence with these palings, as the masters call these Westerners, capital P-E-L-I-N-G-S. And he knows it's going to be difficult. So he flatly refuses. He thinks, you know, maybe they're not serious enough or whatever. But anyway, as I say, he was the tougher one of the two. He refuses. And then Blavatsky goes to some other masters. You know, somebody asked the other day at Watkins' bookshop, why just these two masters? Well, there were other masters, of course, but we emphasize them because they were the ones who took on this project of the Theosophical movement and inspired it. So Blavatsky goes to some others before she goes to Khatumi. I don't know who she went to. It could have been Etreya. There are other masters mentioned in the letters. There's one mentioned called Etreya, A-T-R-Y-A. Does anybody know anything about him? I don't know anything more about him, but he is mentioned. There's another mentioned called the Prince. He was Prince Rakosi, and also had been in a previous incarnation, the Count Saint-Germain. And there's another one mentioned, our Greek brother, he said, who's very interested in what's happening with the Theosophical movement, and that was the Master Hilarion. So there were other masters, and there was another one called Serapis Bey, who was in Egypt. Anyway, I don't know which one she went to, but they all said no, until Khatumi offered. Yes, Pat?
Where does Sabaro fit into this? I haven't heard you speak about him except his name.
Yes, Sabaro. All right, Sabaro comes in a little later. Sabaro joins the Theosophical Society when they've moved from Mumbai. First of all, when they go to India, they are in what's called the Crow's Nest in Mumbai. A few years later, they move down to Madras, which is now called Chennai, and they have this wonderful setup of, I don't know, is it 200 acres? Those of you who've been to Adyar, you would know, Lisa. It's several hundred acres, I believe, beautiful grounds. And he became interested and became a member. He actually had been part of a monastery in Mysore. Mysore is in, I believe it's Tamil Nadu, and he was in one of these secret naths or monasteries where they did divulge a great deal of secret teachings, and he was very well versed in esoteric teachings as a result of going through all kinds of disciplines and so on connected with this nath. But he became a member of the Theosophical Society. He was of great help to Blavatsky in many ways, but later on he felt that she and the masters were divulging too much, that maybe people who hadn't gone through certain disciplines, maybe they weren't ready for some of these things. But he did advise her on a lot of Sanskrit terms, and he was involved in the secret doctrine too, apparently. But later on, he had a bit of falling out with Blavatsky. But he was a chela, he was a disciple of the Master Moria. Okay, an accepted chela. I'm going to be talking in a moment about accepted chelaship and lay chelaship and so on, what chelaship means and what they have to say about it. So eventually Khatumi agreed, and what happened was that when Sinet heard that he had agreed, he didn't know his name, he sat down and wrote not just one letter, but he wrote 2 letters. And Blavatsky managed to transmit those letters, both of them, to Khatumi. And Khatumi, he had to get permission, though, from his boss. You remember I talked about more superior adepts? There was a superior adept to Moria, and Khatumi, and his name he's known as the Choan. He's also called the Shabaron. Other names are given too in the Mahatma letters. But he was a superior boss to these 2. So he said, all right, you can begin with this correspondence, but it has to be temporary. We'll just see how it unfolds. Well, Sinet gets so thrilled when he receives then 2 letters from Khatumi, and so he goes to his friend A.O. Hume, who is a highly respected political figure. Also, by the way, I didn't mention his interest in natural science. He was a great bird collector, and he had an amazing magazine to do with birds called Stray Feathers, and the masters sort of joke about it a bit in the letters. And his bird collection is in the Natural History Museum. He was very interested in science, so he had lots to say about science. By the way, so they have a lot to say about science in the letters, and some of that is very pertaining to what's happening in science today. So there is a whole chapter on science. And while I think of it and I'm mentioning science, this gentleman, Sir William Crookes. Sir William Crookes was a member of the London Lodge when the London Lodge was founded. And he was a member of the Royal Society, a great scientist, a chela of the Master Master Moria. He was a chela of the Master Moria. Moria was keeping quite a close eye on him. He was the one that discovered radiant matter and was the precursor to Marie and Pierre Curie. And he was highly thought of and a wonderful theosophist, with Sir William Crookes. So there's quite a bit of information in the letters about him and what they say about him. That's all in the chapter on science. So Hume hears, Sinnett goes to Hume and says, I've received these 2 letters. And they're so excited, so Hume says, oh, I'm going to write a letter too. So he doesn't ask permission, he gets down and writes a letter immediately to Khatumi. But Sinnett has addressed him to an unknown brother, but he knows now that it's Khatumi because he signed the letter. He may have signed it Khatumi Lal Singh. And so Hume sits down and writes a letter too. But what happens is that Khatumi has to get permission from his superior, and he has to go quite a long way on a horse to the monastery where his superior is to get permission. So, because he says, I want to see that letter from Hume. I think they realized Hume could be difficult because he was highly scientific, had a very developed mind, and maybe was not as intuitive as, he was a bit of a more difficult customer than Sinnett in some ways. But their superior, the Choan, did agree and said, all right, but it's temporary, it's still temporary. That's how the correspondence began, and it lasted 5 years. But not 5 years with our friend Mr. Hume, because he got too sort of argumentative in places at times, and the masters had to explain sometimes these questions you ask are questions whose answers we can barely give to initiates. You're expecting too much. You're expecting to run before you can walk. So and being a highly respected member of the British Raj, he didn't like to accept any no's, and so he was difficult. So actually, I'm sorry.
Were they sort of probing too much, wanting to?
Yes. Well, one of the things that Hume wanted. Yes, I tell you, Hume being very scientific and was very interested in figures and so on. He wanted to know, like, the age of the Earth and the calculation. Also, he got into all this subject of the planetary chain, which is a very deep subject. And he wanted to know, exactly at what point, how many years ago did such and such a thing happen on this Earth. All kinds of complicated calculations relating to cycles. And the master said these figures and calculations, many of them have to be kept secret or until you've reached a certain stage of evolvement, because it's not going to do you any good to know these facts. It's going to be overloading your mind with facts that you don't need at this stage. And so they refuse to give some of these facts. But there are a lot of calculations that are given in Hinduism, the Brahmin calculations, and Blavatsky has indicated that these calculations related to the yugas, for instance, which are major cycles. We're supposed to be in the Kali Yuga right now. She does say in the Secret Doctrine, and the masters were, as you know, involved in the Secret Doctrine too, but that wasn't written until 1888, it does say that those calculations do come close to the truth, but there are still some blinds in there, that all the truths cannot be divulged. And so one has to be satisfied with, they would still gave out a tremendous amount. So yes, they, particularly Hume was difficult. So does that answer? Yes. Good. Yeah. All right, so where did we get to here? So that's basically the story behind how this all started. Do you have any other questions? I see it's 5:20. How much longer am I allowed to go on? Can I get into jailership now? Yes.
Just one question about
Yes.
the concept of freedom.
Freedom, yes.
And how you said that they won't impose themselves on people
No.
who are unwilling.
No.
But then there's this thing about Blavatsky having something removed in order for her to have a direct communication with them. Is that
Yes.
not some sort of interference with her free will?
I don't think so, because she was actually an initiate, you know, and anything that happened with her had been agreed upon. It was like a contract, so I wouldn't think it was against her free will at all. She's referring to, this is a difficult subject. It is included in the book. I have a chapter in there on what the masters have to say about Blavatsky and Olcott. And they do mention that they are selfless, that even though they have certain weaknesses, they're not saints, but they really do care about humanity and about helping humanity. And this is why they are involved in the work of the reviving of these teachings and helping the Mahatmas. Blavatsky, yes, there are mysteries related to Blavatsky. I don't think we know all the answers. She did spend 5 years in Tibet being tutored by the Mahatmas in various monasteries. Not 5 years consecutively, but on and off. She was also in their ashrams in Ladakh, and she writes about some of her experiences. She mentions being in these ashrams. Some of the monasteries she was in, one of them was Shigatse, which was, destroyed, not totally destroyed by the Chinese, but it has now been repaired by the Chinese. But it was the seat of the Panchen Lama, and the Panchen Lama at that time did know Blavatsky. But when people have been in the presence of the masters on a fairly concentrated, intensive training, certain things happen, and there's certain aspects of their being that are almost left there as a link to what is happening with the masters there. I don't understand it, but certainly something is mentioned in the letters. I don't understand it, but do you, Petra?
Yeah, when somebody leaves their precincts and
Precincts?
has been in so close contact with them and doesn't leave these precincts as a full-blown adept, they have to leave one aspect of themselves behind, which serves as communication.
As a link,
Yeah.
as a communication. All right, did everybody hear that? Perhaps not. Oh. So, and it's a difficult subject, but it is mentioned in the chapter. There's a chapter there entirely about those two, what the masters have to say about them. And there's also a chapter in there about the two Mahatmas and what they say about one another. I should mention that Khatumi did go on a retreat, a lengthy, fairly lengthy, several months, at least 3 months. He had to go on this retreat after the correspondence had started. And we rather think that during that retreat, he was going through even further development, even though he was pretty advanced as far as we're concerned. Evolution, spiritual evolution doesn't stop there when you become a master. He was continuing with his evolution. And there were these, what they call bodhisattva towers in Tibet. Maybe in Ladakh too, I'm not sure. Ladakh used to be called Little Tibet, but it's now part of India. There was a tower that he went into, and it appeared that he was almost lifeless for a period of time where he went through some intensive inner work, and he had to be watched over. And he was watched over by a chela who was a very close chela of his, Dwal Kul, this gentleman, who was a Tibetan. And he was also known as, he had a nickname. The masters gave him a nickname, the disinherited one, because his family had disinherited him when he became involved with all this esoteric work. He also had another nickname, which was Benjamin Why he got to be called that, I don't know. But he was in the process of being trained to become a master. So he had to watch over Kuthumi. He was Kuthumi's chela. Interestingly, when Blavatsky she went through some very intense development in Russia. Some of you might know about this. Sylvia Cranston's book on the extraordinary life of Helena Petrovna Blavatsky mentions it. She was in a place called what was it? I forget the name of it. A fairly remote part of Russia. She lost an enormous amount of weight, and she went into almost like a comatose state for a time. And she had to be watched over. She nearly died. But apparently what was happening was she was going through intense work of learning to totally control her psychic abilities. So they wouldn't control her, she would control them. So she wasn't becoming a Mahatma, but she was certainly becoming an initiate, is what some people gauge from that difficult period. So anyway, while Master Kuthumi was going through this intensive inner work, before he went, he asked Master Moria, could you please see that this correspondence continues? Because he felt that it was doing some good. Because the reason why they allowed this correspondence to take place was because these two fellows were gifted literally and literary, and they had good minds, and they could be very useful to the Theosophical movement in being able to explain some of these ideas in a palatable way to other educated Westerners, and then to help spread these ideas and go to England and get other people interested, write articles, write books. And in fact that did happen, because Sinet wrote a book called Esoteric Buddhism, in which, I'm sure you've got it here amongst all these amazing books. Esoteric Buddhism explains a number of the ideas in the Mahatma letters in quite in a more approachable form in some respects. And then he wrote another book too, didn't he, on occultism. So he wrote, and A.O. Hume wrote a number of articles for the Theosophical magazine, The Theosophist. So they believed these two men, though they were not fully accepted chelas, and we'll talk about the difference in a minute, they were still very useful for the Theosophical cause. So Moriam, even though he in the past he'd said, no way do I want to be involved in any correspondence with Palings, found himself agreeing, because he really admired, he loved his brother, and they were working in this project together. And he said, what I would not have denied my brother at that hour. So there are a number of letters written by the Master Mori, and you can tell the tone in the letters changes, because he's more severe and blunt in what he has to say. In fact, he's very blunt about Hume. I mean, he sees, well, they both see through people. They're great psychologists. And he does not mince his words. So, but in his heart, Kuthumi says, he's very tender. And he is harder really on himself than he is with others. He understands the weaknesses of others. When he's blunt, it's not because he's being cruel in any way or malicious. It's because he believes that by hearing the truth, that person will maybe, make amends or do something about it, I suppose. All right, any further questions? Have we got time to talk a bit about chelarship, or do we have a time?
Yeah.
Do we have a little bit of time? Yeah. All right. So they have a lot to say about chelarship, and I think this is a very important subject today. Now, because these two fellows, Sinet and Hume, once this correspondence began, they were very eager to meet these two Mahatmas physically. Sinet wanted to hear, at least to be able to hear Kuthumi's voice. But they didn't realize how amazingly fortunate they were to be allowed to have this correspondence and ask all these detailed questions about the mysteries of life, about creation and evolution and life after death, etc., etc. They were so fortunate, but they wanted more. And they did know that both Blavatsky and Olcott and some other early theosophists had met the Mahatmas. As we know, Blavatsky had met her master many times, also Khatumi, also Serapis Bey, and he knew also that H.S. Olcott, Henry Steele Olcott, met the master Khatumi when he was touring in Lahore. And actually the master came and visited him when he was in a tent. Have you read that? That's absolutely a true story. And he left behind a letter, and he left behind, I believe, a handkerchief too, didn't he? But he visited him in this tent, and on more than one occasion he visited him. And also this gentleman, who I haven't mentioned today, very important man, Damodar. Damodar K. Mavalankar, who was from a Brahmin family, only 20 when he joined the Theosophical Society. He joined the Theosophical Society in Mumbai, and he was a chela of the Master Khatumi, and he had visions of the Master Khatumi from being a child. In fact, I believe the Master Khatumi saved him from some terrible disease when he was very young. He was totally gung-ho about the Theosophical movement and was ready to give his life up for the movement and practiced austerities in his devotion to the masters. Not that that was expected full time. I mean, the masters say we don't want fanaticists, but anyway, but they did admire Damodar because he was such a helpmeet to Blavatsky. He was also a Sanskrit scholar, and he he had a lot of criticism, of course, from the Brahmin family that he was born into, because he contravened some of the Brahmin laws in wanting to, in believing in the universality of life, and I believe he did have a wife, but she was quite young, much younger than him, but he was very good to her actually, and he saw that she was not neglected in any way. But Damodar was definitely a chela of the Master Khatumi, and do you know he had a correspondence with W.Q. George in New York, and they had a very interesting exchange of letters, and that's to be found in the book The Mahatmas and Their Letters by Geoffrey Barbour. Writes in that book some of the documented evidence and includes these letters from W.Q. Judge to Damodar and from Damodar to W.Q. Judge, in that he describes in detail his experiences of going to the ashrams and meeting with Khatumi, and Khatumi coming and fetching him on some of the Tibetan some of his Tibetan helpers coming and taking him to the ashram. In fact, when they were touring up in Lahore, he was with Olcott, and he disappeared for a day or two, and Olcott was very worried about him. And then after a few days he appears again, and he said, well, where on earth have you been? He said, well, I was taken to the ashram. And he looked so much better. He had been taken to the ashram because he needed to be recharged. He had overdone his ascetic practices.
Sorry,
Yes.
You said that
Yes?
Damodar.
Damodar.
Was a chela of Master Khatumi.
Yes.
So what was the term chela actually mean?
All right, the term chela means disciple. All right, now the difference between an accepted chela and a lay chela. A lay chela was a term used by the masters for those who are committed to helping the masters, but they haven't yet maybe gone through certain stringent tests. They haven't totally and utterly proven themselves yet. They use that term for both Sinnett and Hume. They call them lay chelas. And they didn't expect them to give up everything. They liked their alcohol, you know, they were, after all, they were British gentlemen who were used to port after their dinner, and they were used to eating steaks and etc. You know, they were leading a normal British Raj life there in India. And the masters don't expect them to give up their lifestyle. But they are interested in helping the Theosophical movement, so they do call them lay chelas. But a lay chela can be anybody, in fact, who joins a spiritual organization that is under the inspiration of a Mahatma, or under inspiration of a sage that is doing valuable work in the world. Blavatsky, in fact, mentioned in a article that she wrote, an article that she wrote for the Theosophist, which also can be found in Collected Writings, Volume 4, page 611, if you want to look it up. There's an article there about chelarship. And in there, she says, every person who's joined the Theosophical Society can be considered a lay chela if they are committed to the work and they wish to help the masters in their mission of bringing about greater brotherhood and sisterhood in the world. Of course, Blavatsky didn't use the word sisterhood, but you know what I mean. And she points out, it doesn't mean that they're going to see a master, or the master's going to come and knock on the door, or whatever, but it does mean that a link has been established between you and a Mahatma. It may not be a master in a physical body, it may be a master in a more subtle body, but it may be a master in a physical body, and you may not ever see that master or know who that master is, but nevertheless a link has been established. Now, an accepted chela is somebody who has gone through certain stringent tests, is on the spiritual path, and has actually consciously connected up with a Mahatma, which was, of course, the case with Blavatsky, was the case with Alcott, was the case with Anna Kingsford, who was the president of the London Lodge at that time, and she was a chela of the Master Khatumi, but very much into the Western tradition, Hermeticism, for instance, Hermetic teachings. And she wrote an amazing book called The Perfect Way, and the masters say, well, she wrote it with Edwin Maitland, who was also a Theosophist, who also was an accepted chela. And so there were early Theosophists who had conscious connections with the masters, and they would be thought of as accepted chelas. Now, to be a true chela requires three things, all right, and that has been mentioned by Master Doyle Cool, and also it has been mentioned by the Mahatmas in the letters. A true chela is pledged to do three things. Number one, and this is the most important, is pledge to help humanity, serve humanity. That's number one, to serve humanity in some form or another. And the second pledge is related to helping the Mahatmas in their missions, and also helping, in connection with that, the manifestation of the divine plan on this planet. There is a divine plan. Sometimes we think things are going pretty askew, but there is a divine plan in place. There is a great being that ensouls this entire planet. We could call it the planetary logos. And everything in this planet is a part of that great being, who in turn is part of a greater being still, all right, that ensouls the entire solar system, called the solar logos. So one can go on and on and on and on. Everything is part of a greater whole, which is part of a greater whole still. That's called hylozoism. Scientists have discovered that now, and it's called, in science, the living systems theory. All right, that everything within us, you know, I mean, our organs are part of a greater part, which is part of the whole human being, and so on. So this idea of serving, there is a divine plan, and there is a great being in souls that has a plan for our planet. And there's a divine intelligence. But yet we do have free will. Humanity has a certain amount of free will. Right, yes, see Andrew, my brother is reminding me. And the third thing that a chela is pledged to do is related to the third object of the Theosophical Society. And Blavatsky mentions this in that article, which is to investigate and explore the latent powers within man and woman, of course. When we say man, we mean woman as well, of course, absolutely, all genders. All right? So, and that means when you explore and investigate these powers within us, we're talking about the divinity within us that we all have. Everybody has a divine self within, and we're trying to rediscover. We are suffering from amnesia. We've forgotten who we really are. So that is what we're trying to rediscover. And how do we do that? We do that by expanding our consciousness, by reaching out as much as possible. And we do it by, of course, going inward and learning how to meditate. They mention meditation. There's a chapter in there on what they have to say about the spiritual path and discipline. Discipline and the spiritual path. And expansion of consciousness is so important. You can't do it without getting into meditation. And as they say, since the times of Iamblichus, the Neoplatonists, and the times of the ancient rishis in India that go back thousands and thousands of years, prior to the Vedas even, since all those times, the way to develop illumination and discover who you really are and discover this divine self within requires meditation. And they also talk about other things that you need to do, such as fasting from time to time, and things like things like learning to be silent, and learning to be silent, that's something I need to learn, and letting nature speak to you, and letting the intuition, develop. All right, I probably said.
There's no air conditioning in this room.
Yes, I know, it's getting a bit much. Sorry, I should maybe, I will end with just a few comments, all right?
Can I just ask one
question?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yes, right. Okay, go ahead.
Dark Quill,
Morris?
the three requirements.
Yes.
He mentions those in Alice Bailey's books.
Yes,
Is
and
there a link with Alice Bailey? I know she was a
right.
hospice in
yes,
New York, wasn't she? Or started off
yes,
in
yes. I
kitchens
mean,
there or whatever.
she was born in Tunbridge Wells.
Yeah. Do you have any observations?
Yes, I can make some observations, but time is over. This is a whole subject in itself. But no, that's all right. Many people believe that Dwal Kul is the same. He's the Tibetan teacher, and that other material was given out, especially related to psychology, the new psychology, the 7 rays, for instance. So the Master Dwal Kul, his name was spelt differently, and the various variations of how his name is spelt, but he was a Tibetan, and many people believe that he was the same. I know there are different opinions about it, but I am convinced that her work's genuine. I know people are put off by, she mentions the word God, but she mentions what is meant by that. She was an amanuensis of Dwal Kul. He was in charge of a monastery on the borders of Tibet at the time. And she was a theosophist. She belonged to a group in Los Angeles, actually, and he, in fact, met one of her friends who went to visited that part of Tibet, and he gave her a whole parcel of. Gave him, it was a gentleman, a parcel of incense to take back to her in New York, and they talked about Alice Bailey. He was no phantom of her imagination. He was real. And the mere fact that she's mentioning God, she was, of course, a Christian. She had been working in India with soldiers, actually, on a Christian mission. But the Master Khatumi visited her when she was in Scotland. when she was visiting a great aunt. So yeah, I believe there is a connection. So, but it's up to each individual as to whether they believe it or not. Yes?
Have there been any recent non-lay chelas?
Have there been any recent?
Non-lay chelas, non-lay ones, more active chelas.
Chelas
Yes, in recent times.
in recent times.
Our time.
Well, I would think, yes, I would think that any person who's working and committing their life and doing it in an unselfish way is a chela, even though they may not know that they're a chela, or that they may not know the master they're connected with. Some do know that they are. I have a Russian friend, as a matter of fact. Her name's Tamaras. Her maiden name was Sivalevskaya. I met her in India, and I believe she is in contact with the Master Moria. It's a little bit of a story, but she learnt about Theosophy from her teacher, who was in his 70s. He was in contact with the Master Moria in Russia at the time of prior perestroika, and he was part of the underground theosophical movement in Russia. And one day he was very ill. He was her spiritual teacher, Tamara's spiritual teacher. She was only 17 when she met him. One day he was extremely ill, and and she was tending to him in his bedroom. He was very ill, and then all of a sudden there was a basket chair on the other side of the bed. It began to creak, and this was in a place called Krasnodar. It began to creak, and all of a sudden the master began to appear in the chair. She was so scared she ran out of the room, and then when she came back, after she composed herself, her teacher was sitting up in bed. He was looking a lot better and so on, and he said to her, "Where did you go? Why did you run away? Master was here." And she has had direct links with the Master Moria, and she's totally genuine, and she led a pretty sacrificial life in India, put up with all kinds of hardships. She's now living in Canada, in Toronto, as a matter of fact. She married an Indo Canadian, and interesting, and she speaks English fluently and loves the Mahatma letters, reads them all in Russian. They have been translated into Russian. And okay, so it gives. She's also very much into the Agni Yoga works, Agni Yoga, and reads them in Russian, of course, because they were originally written in Russian. All right. So yes, there are chelas today, of course. I mean, these are very critical times. Any other questions before my concluding remarks? Yes.
Would you say something about why there aren't that many women masters?
I think there's probably a lot more than we think there are. I think maybe one of the reasons might be because the initiation that they take, which is known as the fifth initiation, the initiation of masterhood, probably requires might require a great deal of physical courage in some respects. And maybe it's easier to be in a male physical body to go through that particular test than if you're in a female body. Now, I know that Damodar, it seems that Damodar, he disappeared into the Himalayas, you know, and they thought he'd died. And later on, Blavatsky and Olcott received a letter from Khatumi telling them, Damodar is here, he's alive. He went through a tremendous test, and you know, he nearly didn't make it. And he tended to be rather fragile, you know, because he'd gone through all these austerities. But he did make it. And I do believe that he probably did become a full master, perhaps, or at least, you know, a fourth initiation initiate. I mean, I'm speculating, of course. But it was very hard on him. So I'm just wondering whether one might choose. Of course, from the soul's point of view, we're genderless. All right? It's just we choose to be a woman in certain lives or a guy, and we're choosing, you know, we have to experience all gender, you know, and we have to experience all races and all sub-races and all branchlets. unless we do achieve that enlightenment and nirvana and choose to go into nirvana for a very long period of time. Yes, Pamela?
I just wondered what led to the conditions that required a revival of the wisdom. And does that
Conditions.
There was a time
Yes,
there
that's
wasn't
an
a
interesting
revival?
question. One of them was the increased crystallization that was taking place in the religions of the world. Dogmatism, the increased dogmatism that was happening in in Christianity and in other religions and in Hinduism as well, and in Buddhism apparently. So there was increase of crystallization. This fad with spiritualism, which actually was inspired initially by one of the Mahatmas, but then it got a little out of kilter with this fascination with seances, and people then interfering with people who had moved on, and etc. That was of great concern too to the masters. They believed that that people should find out really what is happening. Who is it they're really communicating with? And that was something else, but there was another reason too. They said the world is on the edge of a new dispensation. And I think there's two things that were involved here. One of them they mention is that the world was entering into a special, what was the term? I forget exactly the term used. But, you know, the Kali Yuga is divided into subdivisions. But it was a special part of the Kali Yuga age we were entering into at that time. Perhaps a more positive, you know, I mean, the Kali Yuga age is known as the dark, the black age, the iron age. But it's the age where we make the most progress. You know, just as in life, when things are tough, we can learn the most, can't we? So that was a reason, plus the fact, astrologically, we were at the beginning of a great transition phase, going from the Piscean era, which had been dominating the world for 2,000 years, into the Aquarian age with its great possibilities for altruism, greater altruism and brotherhood and sisterhood. And so this, in fact, we are going through a double transition. I don't think people quite are aware of this, but there's a planetary Aquarian age, but there's also an Aquarian age related to our entire solar system. And that began in the 1700s, and the French Revolution was part of that. The beginning of the liberation, and this great desire for liberation. And you get that also expressed in the music and the literature of the world at that time, beginning in the 1700s. But we're now going through the planetary one, and the transition is still taking place. It's a big overlapping that's taking place. Does that answer your question? They knew we were on the threshold of this new dispensation, and this is why they felt that it was the right time to reveal and revivify these ancient teachings.
And you would say the divine plan has been kept by masters from the beginning of time, then?
Yes, well, according to the secret doctrine, they do. The secret doctrine does give an idea of when this took place. It seems to have been related to the Lemurian times, when we received greater help, what was needed to help with the progress of humanity. But it's specified in quite a bit of detail in the secret doctrine, but that's a whole subject in itself. But we have had a spiritual hierarchy, or brotherhood, sisterhood, watching over humanity since very ancient times. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
Is there any difference between the teachings of the Panchen Lama and the Dalai Lama?
The Panchen, she's asking if there is any difference between the teachings of the Panchen Lama and the Dalai Lama. As far as I understand, they are both involved in the Gelugpa sect of Buddhism, which is the yellow-capped sect. And it's the yellow caps, they were the reformed sect. that was formed in the, was it the 1400s, 1300s, by a great teacher, Tsongkhar Pa. In fact, the Mahatmas write about him. He was almost like an avatar, Tsongkhar Pa, and they believe that the Buddha, an aspect of the Buddha overlighted Tsongkhar Pa. There was some deterioration happening in some of the red cap sects at that time, and there was a sense that there had to be a reform movement. Tsongkhar Pa was the one that reformed the Buddhists, one of the Buddhist sects, and brought about then what's called the Yellow Cap sect. His Holiness the Dalai Lama is part of that sect. And also it's called the Gelugpa, G-L-U-G-P-A, and they wear these yellow hats, you know, elaborate hats and so on. And then there's the Black Hat sect and the Red Caps and so on. Panchen Lama is part of the Yellow Cap. They're both part of the same. So, and they're part of Mahayana, Tibetan Buddhism, you know, but Tibetan Buddhism does have its various sects too. Panchen Lama was really considered the spiritual head of Tibet, whereas His Holiness the Dalai Lama is the political head, but as well has some spiritual leadership as well. But Blavatsky did know the Panchen Lama of the time. And do you know that His Holiness the Dalai Lama is a member of the Theosophical Society? He's an honorary member of the Theosophical Society. On one of his visits to America, I think it was two or 3 years ago, he was actually hosted by the Theosophical Society. I forget which part of America it was. And as a result, he agreed in becoming a member of the Theosophical Society. They made him an honorary member. He is very, very supportive of the work of the Theosophical Society. All right, thank you for bringing that up. I don't think the teachings would be different somehow. All right, and you know that the real Panchen Lama is in China, and we don't know what's happened to him. All right, any other questions? So I think I'll just end by saying, no, I didn't get into chelaship as much as I would have liked to, but there's a whole chapter in there about it. I'd just like to end by saying that I think the spiritual benefits of contemplating the Masters and reading their letters today are very relevant, and that there are many spiritual benefits. And I think that one of them is that by realizing that the Mahatmas are really the template for our future. They are our future. And by reading their works and reading what they have to say about life's problems and the mysteries of life, it helps raise our own vibrations. You know, thought is energy. And if we can enter into that and we can concentrate on these exemplary beings, we are not only progressing our own future, spiritual future, but we're also helping to expand the consciousness of humanity at large. Yes?
Very quick question.
Yes.
Are there any Western masters when all of these
Mm.
women
Are in Hindu bodies, or in, yes, and Tibetan bodies. Yes, they do mention the Mahatma letters. Their Greek brother, who I believe is Master Hilarion, who was not in an Eastern body. He was in, I believe,
Cyprian.
Pardon?
The Cyprian.
Cyprian, that's right, thank you. He was in a Cyprian body, very much connected with Cyprus. And I believe Prince Rakosi, of course, was not in a Hindu body. He's in a Western body. So yes, there are, and there are probably more. And Serapis Bey was not in a Hindu body, right? So yes, of course, there are, they can be in any kind of, from any culture, all right? It just happens to be that was in that particular, and they might have chosen then to have prolonged the life of that particular body instead of then reincarnating and using another body. All right, well, you've been extremely patient. Thank you so much. Sorry I wasn't able to get into discipleship a bit more because it's a wonderful subject. But thank you very much for being so patient, and have a wonderful bank holiday, and hope to see you all again in the not too distant future. Thank you. Thank you.